What's up, Packer fans? Happy Tuesday. We are inching closer to the Packers divisional round game with the San Francisco 49ers. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Always appreciate you joining me. Today, I have a lot that I want to get into, including Rams Cardinals, some Packers news and notes. I want to go over the 49ers injury update, which is, of course, of the utmost importance. I also rewatched Packers 49ers, want to kind of go through some of my notes as well as my grades from week 3 and kind of reviewing who performed well, who didn't perform so well. So we got a lot to get into. Let's start with Rams Cardinals because I thought this was a very intriguing game for a lot of reasons. This is going to set up who plays the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And let's make no mistake about it, the Rams looked absolutely fantastic. And as great as the Rams looked, the Cardinals looked that much worse. Like they were not prepared. They were not ready. They were not in any way, just up for this game, which is inexcusable. And it begs to question. Yeah, I have a lot of questions, frankly, on Cliff Kingsbury and if he's ultimately the guy in Arizona that's going to be able to lead that team moving forward. That's an awful look from Kyler Murray, including the pick in the end zone. Feel bad for J.J. Watt, who works himself all the way back from injury just to have his team basically no-show against the Rams. That was an ugly look from the Cardinals and not being competitive in that game at all. You were hoping for a much better game. We certainly did not get that. But on the plus side for the Rams, I thought they looked fantastic. I thought Matthew Stafford looked ready for the moment. OBJ has been a revelation for them. And I have been very steadfastly in the OBJ is overrated camp. And I'll go back to New York and certainly his time in Cleveland as well. Both of those stints did not go well or end well. And yes, the talent was always there, but he never elevated his team. He never was consistently making his team better. Now, those were two brutal situations, and we can talk about the quarterbacks in both of those stops. We can talk about the entire team culture in both of those stops, but you can make a very strong argument that OBJ did not help those teams' causes or elevate his team to the next level in any way. That's not the case with the Rams so far. He is very much elevating that team and how they are playing. And if by any chance it is Packers Rams in the NFC Championship game, and we've got a couple games that would have to go the right way in order for that to happen, I guarantee you we are going to hear a ton about OBJ and choosing between the Packers and the Rams and what he ultimately wanted to do. I'm still a pretty firm believer that he wanted to go to LA. I'm also a pretty firm believer that Brian Gutekunst and company were basically just showing token appreciation and, weren't really going all out to sign OBJ. And I think that's mostly been reported at this point. But that's going to be something that is going to be talked about ad nauseum if that gets to that point, because he's been phenomenal for the Rams. And with Robert Woods going down specifically, that him being there to go along with Cooper Kupp, that is as dynamic of a duo as you have in the NFL right now. If Stafford can play like he did against the Cardinals on Monday night, that's going to make that team incredibly, incredibly tough to beat. So they looked great. And I think now, if we're looking back in hindsight, so the question going into the week was, would you rather play the Eagles, the Cardinals, the 49ers, the Rams? Like, who would you want coming to Lambeau Field in that divisional round? No question about it. The correct answer was the Eagles, followed by the Cardinals, right? Any of those teams just looked not ready at all. I think you would have been, pretty well pleased if either of those teams would have pulled off upsets and came to Lambeau. That's not the case, but I think you can argue that the 49ers did Green Bay a decent favor by taking out the Cowboys for two reasons. I think first and foremost, you now play the Cardinals the 49ers instead of the Rams. Now, both of those teams can beat the Packers, and the Packers can beat both of those teams. They're going to be phenomenal games either way. But I have to say, based on watching both the 49ers and the Rams this week, give me the 49ers over the Rams. And then, the second thing is I think if the Cowboys win that game, Rams come to Green Bay, Dallas goes to Tampa Bay. And to me, that makes that a very, winnable and easy game for Tampa Bay, making it that your Super Bowl run is the same as it was a year ago where you had to go Rams at home, Buccaneers at home. And in this case, you get 49ers at home, which again, not an easy game. I'm not looking past that at all. But then you either get the Rams or the Buccaneers. You don't have to face both of them, which I still think is a benefit. So not thinking the 49ers just yet. Green Bay has to get through that game before I'm completely to that point. But at least on paper, it seems like Green Bay got a slightly better route out of this than they would have, had they had to, had to play the Rams this week and then probably Tampa Bay the week after. I think one of the really interesting things to sort of keep an eye on as the Rams have to travel all the way to the Buccaneers is that travel. They're going to have to go from West Coast to East Coast on a short week, Monday night playing, and then they go to Sunday next week against Tampa Bay. It's the earlier game of the two, so that plays a factor as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the Rams handle that. And then you've got Wirfs in a walking boot, Ryan Jensen. They're going to not be able to know if he plays until later in the week, although you would assume he would play as well. There's going to be a lot of intrigue in that matchup. And I'll say this, the wild card weekend that it was, we basically got one good game, right? 49ers Cowboys with, the Raiders, Raiders Bengals was okay, but we didn't get great matchups. Most of them were blowouts. I don't think any team that had a legitimate chance to win the Super Bowl was eliminated yet. I just don't. I don't think the Cowboys were going to win 3 more games with that team. They clearly didn't win the first, but had they even pulled out that game against the 49ers, they're not going 3-0 against Tampa in Tampa, then either Green Bay or the Rams, and then whoever they would have faced in the Super Bowl. That team's not winning it all. They're just not. And no other team, the Raiders aren't winning it all. Like, no team that was eliminated was a serious threat to win the Super Bowl. The 8 best teams are the 8 teams that are left. And that's going to make this round of games so incredibly entertaining as you get these marquee matchups. I think Bengals and Titans is a perfect appetizer to the rest of the weekend. Then you get Packers 49ers, and then Bucks Rams should be epic. And then I think the game of the week is Bills Chiefs. So I can't wait for this slate of football. And sometimes what happens if you think of it as March Madness, right? March Madness happens and you get all these early upsets, and then all of a sudden you've got all these 1 seeds versus 12 and 13 seeds, and then the 1 seeds just walk through them. The early upsets lead to worse games later in the tournament. Whereas sometimes if you get those early chalk victories, now you all of a sudden have some 8 and 9s and some, maybe some 7 seeds that are upsetting some 1s and 2s, and you get more upsets in that round. So, not that we're necessarily hoping for upsets this week as Packer fans, but I do think because you had basically the weekend go chalk, and ultimately I think the best, 6 teams move on along with the Titans and Packers making it 8. I think you're going to end up with a phenomenal slate of games where all 4 of these games have the ability to be really, just phenomenal matchups that could go down to the wire. So the awful games that we saw this past weekend are hopefully going to lead to phenomenal games this weekend. And of course, we couldn't, wrap up Cardinals Rams without talking about the fact that just a little bit seemed like maybe the Cardinals missed Rasul Douglas and Devondre Campbell in that game. I have to think that those 2 players may have helped out just a little bit against that Rams offense. Let's talk some Packers news and notes really quick. The really only noteworthy, note or transaction from Monday was the fact that Lucas Patrick is officially off the COVID IR list, and no additional players throughout the NFL, including for the Packers, went on the COVID-19 list on Monday. So that is a great sign for the playoffs moving forward. And of course, getting Lucas Patrick back. I think the big thing here, you might hear, well, Lucas Patrick is back on Monday. What does that mean, right? But he's very likely the starting right guard. And again, he's playing a new position than he had been really all season long. So you want him to be practicing all week, and you don't want to have to be making the decision late in the week of, well, should we go with Royce because he had the full week of practice, or should we go with Lucas because he's more of a veteran? This should solidify Lucas at right guard and allow him to slide in there and play the entirety of that game at that spot without having to move anything around. So I think Lucas getting back and being able to practice all week is actually a pretty big deal, maybe more than kind of went noticed on Monday. The more important injury updates, though, weren't on the Packers side of the ball. It was on the 49ers side of the ball because, of course, you've got some very key injuries. Now, let's start with Fred Warner. Apparently, he is going to be able to practice this week, and Warner basically tweeted, I don't know if it was on Twitter or Instagram, but posted on social media that he's going to be good to go for this weekend. Now, as I've always mentioned, that doesn't mean he's 100%, and even 85%, 90% of Warner for the 49ers is better than anything else, but 85 to 90% of Warner isn't 100% Warner. If that means he can't get quite sideline to sideline or get back in coverage, it'll be very interesting to see just how healthy he is going into that game and how, his ankle and everything is able to weather the Green Bay weather, no pun intended, throughout the majority of that game. So that will be number one. Number two is Nick Bosa. And Kyle Shanahan also mentioned that they anticipate he will be able to play in the game, which is huge news for them. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, it's not like he's fighting a bicep or an ankle or a knee or something, right? If he's able to go, you're going to expect him to be, pretty close to 100%, at least from a playing ability standpoint, right? So looks like they're going to have both of their studs in there. The other piece of news is Jimmy Garoppolo, a bit banged up as well. He's got a shoulder issue to go along with his thumb. Does not sound like anything's going to hold him out of practice, but Jimmy G certainly fighting some things as well. And then Jordan Willis sounds like maybe out this week for the 49ers, rotational edge rusher for them. So that will be another injury to keep an eye on. But mostly, if you're a 49ers fan, mostly a very good news from a San Francisco side of things. All right, quickly wanted to touch base on my rewatch of Packers 49ers. As you know, Packers had a 17-0 lead, and I felt Green Bay really dominated that first half of football. Then you had, of course, special teams rear its ugly head. You had Trenton Cannon get the kick return, and then you had some really questionable penalties. And that was really one of the key takeaways is there were eight, and it was Jerome Boger, of course. So as we see this past weekend, Jerome Boger and his crew not afraid of some interesting penalties, to say the least. Both sides got screwed over in a couple different instances in this game. It wasn't just the Packers. The 49ers had some go against them as well. But I thought Green Bay had some worse ones go against them, some brutal pass interference calls. There's a roughing the passer on Jair that was close. You had the grounding penalty by Jimmy Garoppolo where they didn't call it grounding. It seems like that was probably the right call, but there was a lot of things that could have been interpreted in that situation. If it was grounding, that would have changed everything in that game. There was the huge helmet-to-helmet hit over the middle on Davante Adams that almost took him out of the game. That wasn't called. There was the play that Matt LaFleur challenged that should have been overturned and wasn't. There was just a lot in that game. And the biggest thing of note is whether when Green Bay's way or the 49ers way, there was just way too much officiating in that game. And hopefully this is a much cleaner game that doesn't involve that. I thought we saw a much more aggressive Joe Barry in week 3 than we have over the more recent part of the season. I think both of these teams have evolved so much from week 3 that it's tough to glean too much from that game. But I don't think we're going to see, the same exact game plan from Joe Barry. Well, not the same exact, but any sort of similar game plan where they brought a lot of pressure. They brought some corner blitzes. Maybe, if they need to get Jimmy G off his spot and maybe use their corners against those 49ers wide receivers, maybe they do some things like that, but I don't think it's going to be as much as they did. I thought Garoppolo mostly handled that well. And in the second half, he really got in a great rhythm. And we once again saw Green Bay probably play a little bit too much off coverage and let Jimmy G get in a rhythm. That is not a recipe for success. I thought Green Bay tackled well. I thought they were very disciplined in that game against the 49ers running attack. I think there's a lot of things they can take away in regards to especially how they defended the run and how they stayed disciplined and how they tackled, which are going to be things that are so incredibly important for this weekend's game against the 49ers. Let's see here. What else did I want to go over? Again, I thought Green Bay firmly outplayed them in week 3. I didn't think there was, much debate about that. Yes, the 49ers had a chance to win at the end, but as I went through and kind of reviewed the process of everything, I thought Green Bay had way more opportunities for victory, took a couple fluke plays, some bad penalties to get the 49ers back in it. And I thought, again, Green Bay was unequivocally the better team. Doesn't always mean the better team always wins. In this case, it happened, but it took a last-second field goal and an epic drive by Rodgers and Davante Adams at the end of the game. I also thought the 49ers in this game had no real answers for Davante Adams. Rodgers and Davante had a couple missed connections in this game. Outside of that, the 49ers didn't have an answer for Davante. I expect Green Bay to go there early and often and see if the 49ers can do anything about it. Because we've reached the point, and you guys know this, I don't need to tell you this, we've reached the point where Davante Adams cannot be single covered. So if the 49ers aren't double covering Davante, you're going to him. And you're going to him over and over and over until the 49ers change their defense. And if they don't, you're going to keep feeding Davante. But I loved how Aaron Jones ran in that game out of shotgun. And if they have to start paying much more attention to Davante Adams, that's going to change the 49ers' approach to that game as well. That game was Yosh Nijman's first start. Now you're going to have David Bakhtiari. So more on that in just a second. But overall, I thought the Packers well outplayed 49ers in week 3. And I think it hopefully lends itself to be in the same way this coming Saturday. Again, both teams have evolved a ton, but I overall liked what I saw coming out of that game and rewatching it. As far as grades in that game, went back and looked at everything. Packers had a plus 6.75 grade on offense, which was actually my fourth highest offensive grade of the year. So they were very efficient on offense. They had some miscues. They didn't get in the end zone a couple times. There's some things they definitely could have done better, but the process was good and the 49ers didn't have a ton of answers. On the flip side, I thought it was actually the fourth lowest graded game for the defense, negative 3.10 all season long. So I think there's a lot of things that Green Bay can clean up from that game, and their defense has gotten much better from where it was earlier in the season. I know they've had a little bit of slippage as of late. I'm not concerned over that. I think you're going to see a much better Packers defense for the remainder of this playoffs. As far as who played well and who didn't, my top three players on offense in that game, Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, and MVS. MVS put a star next to that one because he is, at this point, we're not sure if he's going to be able to play against the 49ers, so that could be of note. On the flip side, the three lowest graded players, Royce Newman, Josh Myers, and Yosh Nijman. Nijman and Newman unlikely to play in this game due to the fact that you've got Bakhtiari and then Lucas Patrick probably going to be starting at right guard. You still have Myers, so he's going to have to play a little bit better, but neither Myers or Nijman had like brutal grades. It was just slightly below negative. So even still, two of those keys, Nijman and Newman, who struggle in that game, now you're replacing those with much better players, and hopefully that is another benefit for Green Bay going into this game. Top three defensive players, Jair Alexander, Kenny Clark, and believe it or not, Oren Burks, who actually had a pretty nice game against the 49ers. Chris Barnes was banged up. They did some three linebacker looks as well, and Burks actually played pretty darn well in that game. And then the three lowest graded players, the lowest was Kingsley Keke, who may or may not even play in this game. And then you had Dean Lowry and Rashawn Gary, who, if you go back to earlier in the season, they actually started off much slower, and then they just accelerated from about week 5 on. So you can expect both of those players to be better. So a lot of Green Bay's weaknesses in this game are players who are either playing a lot better now than they were before, or who probably won't even play in this game. On the flip side, Rodgers, Adams, Jair, Kenny, they should still have their full complement of players outside of maybe MVS, and I don't think Oren Burks is going to play a ton, but overall, I think you got to feel happy with who played well in that game, who didn't, and how that translates going into this coming Sunday. I also want to give another shout out to the Lions because, and we'll see what this means, but I think the Lions did the Green Bay Packers a big favor in reteaching them how important discipline is on the backside and just an overall contain and how the defense has to play as a singular unit, or everything can go to crap very quickly. I can guarantee you that Kyle Shanahan is licking his chops going over all of the reverses and jet sweeps and motions and gadget plays that the Lions ran and had success with against Green Bay. But I think the Lions did the Packers a huge favor by putting that on there so Green Bay can see where those weaknesses are and correct them before they get to the 49ers. Because I can guarantee you, whether Detroit put that on tape or not, the 49ers were going to test the Packers with that stuff. And if they didn't learn their lessons from Detroit, maybe that would have been a much bigger issue. Now Joe Barry, Matt LaFleur, and the entire defense knows that that's something they have to get better at. And again, hat tip to Detroit for playing that game hard and giving Green Bay everything they could handle. Because I think Green Bay is probably going to learn a lot from that can actually prepare them for the 49ers. I have also been wondering a couple of really quick things here as I wrap this up. I have been wondering, could we see some Trey Lance in this game? I'm not talking about as a true quarterback per se, but I'm talking about, could we see some Trey Lance formations? We know Green Bay has struggled with mobile quarterbacks. We know that Jimmy G is struggling with a shoulder and a thumb injury and playing in brutal cold temperatures and environments. Could we see some power formations, some power running, some option plays, some reads from Trey Lance in this game? Maybe, maybe not, but I think it's definitely something that Green Bay needs to be prepared for, because it would not shock me if we saw some Trey Lance in some specific sets and formations. And I know everyone's going to get some PTSD from Colin Kaepernick back in the day and him running all around the Packers defense. I think Green Bay will be prepared for it, but it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a little bit more Trey Lance. I don't think he played against the Cowboys. I'm trying to remember. I just rewatched it. I didn't see any Trey Lance. So we didn't see any, but it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a couple different formations, a couple different plays here and there where Trey Lance was utilized against the Packers defense. Had a chance to chat with Aaron Nagler on Let's Talk Football over on Cheesehead TV. So make sure to check that out if you haven't already. But we talked some David Moore, and we're both kind of leaning on I think David Moore gets activated for this game. I think you see him very sure-handed and very confident. And sort of when you see that, you just kind of know it. I think the Green Bay Packers have to know that he's probably the guy that feels most confident back there right now. I would expect him to be activated, especially if MVS is out and you've got an open spot at that wide receiver position anyway. I think it's time to activate David Moore regardless and make sure that he's your guy returning punts in this game, because that could ultimately matter, field position or just being able to catch the punt when needed, make sure when to fair catch, make sure when to let it bounce, all those sort of things. I think we could very easily see David Moore return for this game and play a part as a punt returner, and we'll see if he does anything else outside of that. But even if he just does that, it's probably worth activating him. Last but not least, I don't know if I have time for this exactly, but let's just do it anyway. I always say, and you may have heard me say this before, I talked to, I think I talked to Marcus Eversole on the radio on this on Monday, but there's two ways, in my opinion, that you can win a Super Bowl from a roster standpoint. The first is that you just have maybe 8-ish guys that are of the most premium players at the most premium positions, and they're going to ultimately carry you. Now, you still need guys outside of that, but like it's those guys that are going to carry you. It's, you go back to the 2010 Super Bowl, and to me, this is that team. It was a good team overall, but you had Aaron Rodgers, Jennings and Nelson starting to come into his own on the outside. You had great offensive tackles, and then on the defensive side of the ball, Cullen Jenkins and Raji, Clay Matthews. Then you had Tramon Williams and Charles Woodson. You had your premium players, Nick Collins, of course, premium players at premium positions, and those were the guys that carried them to the Super Bowl. Now, there's a lot of next man ups along the way, and everyone deserves credit, but I think we can make an argument that the Frank Zombos and the Charlie Pepras and all those, no disrespect, even the Howard Greens who made one of the huge plays in that game, like these are replacement players, and you have the opportunity as an offense or as a defense. There were players that teams could attack on both sides of the ball, and where there were just some weak points. But it didn't matter because Green Bay's high-end players were so good that they were able to help carry Green Bay through to a Super Bowl victory. So that's number one. You just have some of the highest-end players that you can imagine at key positions to lead you to a Super Bowl. The other is that, and I kind of think of the Philadelphia Eagles, the Nick Foles version of this, as a great example of this, where you don't really have maybe some of the top tier talent at a lot of the positions, but you're just good everywhere. And you don't have a specific weakness on your team. And because of that, it makes it very difficult for other teams to target you. And if you play your brand of football, you're going to win more often than not. It's you're only as strong as your weakest link mentality. And I believe you can be either of those. As I look at this Green Bay team right now, with them getting all these players back from injury, I feel like they have now solidified both of those. Not just one. Usually it's one or the other. I think Green Bay has both. Top-end talent at premium positions. All right. Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, Aaron Jones at running back, Devontae Adams at wide receiver. You've got David Bakhtiari back at left tackle. You've got Zadarius, Preston, Rashawn, and maybe even Merciless at edge rusher. Kenny Clark at defensive tackle. And I'm not saying, by the way, that Merciless is like a premier player or anything like that, but I'm just saying the combination at edge is basically an elite edge group at this point. Kenny Clark at defensive tackle, Devondre Campbell inside linebacker, Jair Alexander at corner. You can even include Amos at safety. I certainly would. You've got premium players at premium positions that could carry you to a Super Bowl, bar none. However, now you're talking about some of these players that have been a little bit weaker for you at times throughout the season. Maybe a Kingsley Keke along the defensive line. Maybe a Jonathan Garvin and Tipa Nalai at edge rusher. Maybe a Shannon Sullivan at corner. Maybe a Royce Newman at guard. Like some of these players, now because you're getting these healthy players back, may not even need to play. Or if they do, certainly not as much or as often, or you now only have like one guy to sort of attack and you can cover for them along the way. Green Bay has the depth and the overall, players at every position to be successful, even if they didn't potentially have some of the top end talent. But they also have the top end talent. And that's why I really like this Green Bay Packer team to not only beat San Francisco, but to have a real legitimate chance to go on and win a Super Bowl. It is divisional round playoff week, Packers 49ers. I can't wait. I appreciate you joining me. As always, I'm going to be right back here tomorrow, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.